Dan, before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this conversation, I think it's important for the audience to, of course, be transparent. You and I are first cousins, our dad's brothers. We share a legend in our life in Grandpa Bobby, our dad's, dad. We grew up in Niagara Falls, St. Catharines together, Ontario, small town Canada. I think we can dive a little bit into that and how that's influenced your entrepreneurial journey. What stands out about your, upbringing, growing up in small town Niagara Falls?
Well, first of all, I think growing up in an entrepreneurial family imparts so many pieces of wisdom in starting a business. And I'm sure, the furniture store and Grandpa Bobby had a big impact on you as well. But for the context of the audience, our grandfather, Bob Sachs, had a furniture store on Main Street in Niagara Falls, Canada. And both our parents worked in the store, obviously our grandfather, but it was actually started by our great-grandparents in 1908. Elon and I have memories of rolling around in the basement that had carpets, like these carpet rolls, and as kids we would play around or jumping on the beds, and our great-grandfather, William Sachs, would yell at us with his cane, or Doris would make sure that we got to keep our hands off the clean couches. So there's so many memories in growing up in an entrepreneurial family. That whole Main Street environment was so integral to our upbringing. Yet when I was graduating from school in 2008, it was the height of the Great Recession. Businesses all around the world were struggling. And in fact, our family's, furniture store had to shut down after over 100 years in business. And that really marked me just from, a standpoint of, is the entrepreneurial economy of, Main Street dead, or is there a way to revive that digitally? And how do we, make sure that entrepreneurs can thrive? Because Elon, as you and I know, in the town, we had such an identity tied to that furniture store. Both of our dads and, our great grandmother, all were so part of that experience. It was hard to think of the family that, unassociated to our business life, and all the business, all the stories that Grandpa Bobby would tell us. He talked about two things, maybe three. It was like golf, fishing, business.
Absolutely. It's funny. I mean, we grew up, at the furniture store, at, the hotel, the paint shop, and saw our parents, our grandfather selling furniture, and saw that entrepreneurial mindset. I actually, there's this context for the audience. There's a story within the family of Daniel. Daniel, when I think you were around 10 or 11 years old, as the story goes, and you were on the floor of the furniture store selling picture frames, selling furniture. You were the youngest ever sales individual at Sachs Furniture. Great story. Seems to have followed you through, because it seems like you can sell anything. But
it's funny that you heard that, because I think one of the things, I remember the lady's name was still Lily, and she bought a curio cabinet. And I remember Grandpa saying, the key to sales is to, greet someone, welcome them, satisfy them, but then you also want to thank them. So I wrote her a handwritten note saying, thank you for the, hope you enjoy this furniture. And she wrote back. So we had a pen pal relationship. I think I still have those notes in a box somewhere in my parents' house. But I think the principles of sales and entrepreneurship stand, which is you want to delight the customer and you want to build a lifetime relationship with them. So I think a lot of those insights from the furniture store really marked me.
For the past decade, or more, you built an amazing organization, amazing business in AppDirect, with offices in multiple different locations across the globe and everything else. And now you're embarking on a new business. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you would kind of define the transition from Gen AI to Agentic AI?
Yeah, sounds great. So for context, where we left off, grew up in this entrepreneurial family, was graduating in 2008, height of the Great Recession. Businesses were failing. And I happened to be in San Francisco visiting my friend Nicholas Demre, who later became my co-founder at AppDirect. And the insight that we had is that the cloud was emerging, and there were these applications called software as a service applications that now are really the heart or the pulse of the B2B economy, whether that be Shopify for retail or Toast for restaurants or horizontal services like Box and Microsoft 365. But at the time, all these services were in their infancy. Honestly, the first thing I did was catalog like how many SaaS services are there. There were maybe like it was hard to get on. Now, obviously, there are like hundreds of thousands. And we built AppDirect with a simple premise of how do we help businesses find, buy new software, and how do we create trust in a cloud economy? And the insight that we had from the furniture store, bring it back to our family experience, is that businesses want to buy from trusted relationships. And I remember a story that was very clear where the furniture store was kind of always operated pen and paper. So everything from inventory management to sales to marketing, all like manual. And when I was maybe 13, 14, there was this guy, Rick Stark, you might remember the name, but he had a company called Profit Systems based in Colorado. And it was a vertical inventory management kind of enterprise resource planning tool for furniture stores. And he said to Grandpa Bobby, like, hey, I'm going to come, tell you about my software. And Grandpa said, there's not a chance that I'm like deploying software. I don't know any of this, but if the guy's flying in to meet me, he's going to buy me a dinner. Maybe I take him. So it was me, my dad, maybe even your dad and Grandpa, and we were all at this, restaurant. And again, my grandpa was like, oh, this software baloney or whatever, whatever he would say. But this guy, Rick Stark, as the dinner was going on, he related to the furniture industry and the pains of, furniture. And I remember the waitress, this is crazy, but he was so good at sales that he persuaded to sell the waitress a mattress from Saks Furniture Store. And he was like, oh, I see you have a bad back from carrying the tray. Maybe you need a new mattress that will make you feel better. By the end, she was sold. She was going to come to Saks Furniture and buy the mattress. And Grandpa Bobby said, look, I don't know anything about software, but if this guy can outsell me in my own town, I should trust him with my technology. And the insight from that was that, businesses really need trust when buying their software. So that carried through after my whole experience in AppDirect. And essentially what we did is build a commerce platform to resell technology all over the world. AppDirect's now a 1,000-person organization with millions of end users through hundreds of enterprises and thousands of trusted local resellers. We power technology resale and generate north of $3 billion across our network in annual software revenue. And it's kind of funny because it started just from, a few people in an apartment, but with this philosophy that businesses really want to buy from humans, and that trust is critical. And as you mentioned, when I recently transitioned out of AppDirect, I'm still involved with the board and big active co-founder. But as Gen AI was evolving, I thought it's kind of this next tectonic shift in enabling technology. So it should be a good time to start something again. And my view is the same as before, which is even though technology is assisting us, we can create software built around trust. And I think that there's a lot of understanding now in society around what large language models have enabled, particularly in generating content with generative AI. But I think that's just the beginning. And I think when it comes to business software, generative AI is somewhat helpful. But the next evolution, in my view, is going to be what's called Agentic AI. And what that does is it takes action on what you're doing. So where generative AI can generate content that you then can copy and paste and use, Agentic AI can learn from machine learning and take action that's going to improve your business. And to me, that's where the huge leap in AI is going to come for businesses. And we haven't even seen Agentic AI companies kind of operate at scale yet. So I really believe that just as I saw and felt SaaS in its infancy, I feel right now we have this whole new wave that could be much, much bigger than SaaS with Agentic AI.
For the audience, the way that I understand both. Gen AI is much more reactive. There's an input, it spits something out for you, it makes a recommendation, and it does amazing things, but largely that's the extent of it. Where with agentic AI, you literally have like a digital colleague who's proactive. So if you think about the example of a sales development representative who's trying to drum up business in this technology, agentic AI, you can literally go out, find the right customers, find the right messaging, tailor your messaging, change up the messaging, and this is largely done by the agent autonomously. Can you just fill us in high level? What is Landbase? What are you guys trying to solve? And how does all this come into play with your vision at Landbase?
So Landbase intelligently automates your go-to-market. And as we discussed with Agentic AI, we can take action to be able to bolster your go-to-market, helping you create consistent demand for your business and generate leads that convert. So one of the pain points that I've recognized from any business, whether that be the family furniture store or other businesses, is that the lifeblood of your business is your ability to have customers coming through the door. And while there are a lot of tools and technologies that have made it easier, there's also a lot more noise in the online world to be able to differentiate from others. So as you mentioned with the example of a sales development rep, there are many manual repetitive tasks that humans do across an organization that takes a lot of time and effort. Oftentimes those manual repetitive tasks are actually done across many different technology tools. So if you want to be successful at outbound lead generation today, you probably need to be very proficient in setting up your DNS settings, which most people don't need to know what DNS or DKIM or any of these things are. If you want to make sure that these emails get delivered, you need to be focused on delivery and deliverability. You almost need like a PhD in that, not the core competency about most business owners. You probably need to buy a list from somewhere or use a tool that has both company and contact data to be able to filter. You then need to be able to sync that to your CRM. You then need to be able to have people that would be manually doing omni-channel outbound or inbound, which includes personalizing messages, email, phone, text, LinkedIn. It's a lot. And what we know is that 45% of outbound campaigns tend to fail. And oftentimes it is due to this lack of digital trust. So what Landbase does is essentially uses AI and machine learning to automate that full end-to-end flow. But our AI is trained by real human interactions, and it also puts you in a loop to approve and to understand your tone of voice. So the business can scale with a consistent message. It can personalize multi-channel outbound and help really generate leads. And as I mentioned, businesses previously may have had dozens or hundreds or thousands of SDRs. It might just be the proprietor or the business owner that was doing this work. But it was definitely something that's very manual, and people were flying blind because they didn't have context of the performance data. But what's possible now through machine learning is to be able to understand what messages convert. So as I mentioned, we built an AI data model purpose-built for go-to-market. We're calling that GTM1 Omni, which is the world's first and most powerful AI model built for go-to-market. And our AI model is not just a language model that can spit out content, but it's also a predictive model that can score the content that's generated and be able to predict the outcome of that by understanding who the sender is and who the receiver is. So if I'm sending a message to you as Stacked HR for recruiting, and I'm Landbase, I can specifically understand your Elon Sachs, here's your profile, here's your tone of voice, here's the message that I should be sending, and I can generate content that is then reinforced and scored to predict the outcome. So we all know that one of the things that's really annoying whether it was with AI before, is just the propensity for spam or irrelevant messages. What our
Yes.
AI model does is it focuses on deep personalization, and eliminates and definitely minimizes irrelevant messages or spam. So we can simulate, will the receiver like this message? Will it be relevant? Will it be human? And we can have it be approved by real humans, to really increase the odds that it gets received and that it's relevant. And that's kind of the power of what we're doing with Landbase.
Yeah, it's fascinating. In the last couple years, I don't know about you, I've never gotten so many cold emails from folks who are clearly leveraging AI to write these emails, and they're attempting personalization and attempting customization to me and my business, but they're very clearly generated by AI and actually aren't very personal at all. Um, and I think that what I'm hearing from you is based on the amount of data, the amount of ML that you guys are able to do on your proprietary data, and through different channels, you are actually able to get to folks in a genuinely authentic, personal manner. And then, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
Well, I think one context on generative AI is that you achieve kind of a language communication through prompting. And what that means is you're typing into a language model in natural language something, and you're getting something spit out by a machine. It's inherently, robotic, and there is risk of hallucinations. Where our methodology is being trained specifically on human performance data with humans in the loop that reinforce it. And we have a variety of mechanisms to increase the writing style from AI to human using real humans in the loop. So I think it's a very different experience, the output that you're getting, and that creates much better results. I think to your point on email interaction or even phone or text, what I would say is, like, even as a CEO, I get, you know, bombarded just like we all do with email. But over my time, I once had a cold email from Michael Dell. He literally emailed me and I thought it was fake. And then his assistant stalked me on LinkedIn, and I was like, well, maybe I'll take the call just for fun. And like 2 days later, she scheduled it, and I was on a call with Michael Dell, and it was one of the more important emails. Same thing with Aaron Levy. He just told email, and he's saying, hey, I'm Aaron Levy. I've heard you're doing with AppDirect. I want box to be distributed. Let's hang out for lunch. And he's become a long-term friend. So I think that for me or anyone to say that they don't like someone cold outreaching them is really losing sight of your business. The key is it needs to be relevant, and that the person needs to have credibility. So one of the things that Landbase is focused on beyond just outbound is also bolstering the individual credibility of the sender as well as the credibility of the brand. So one of the things that we found is that if a CEO is sending a message, they're going to have a much higher chance of getting responded to than if it's a sales development rep that's just starting out in their career. However, if it's a sales development rep that has a lot of credibility through the vertical niche that they're in, they can bolster their credibility through thought leadership over LinkedIn or a blog or other social. So I think in today's day and age, regardless if you're a Fortune 500 CEO or if you're someone starting out in your career, you have the ability to become a thought leader. And that thought leadership is indexed online, and that helps give you credibility in your niche. And one of the things that with AI, there's a lot of misconceptions around is that all the algorithms are changing. So LinkedIn, Google, Microsoft, all their spam filters and their algorithms are evolving. But what we're finding is that they're not saying no to AI assisted content. What they're saying no to is generic, irrelevant content. So in LinkedIn, a lot of the algorithm shifts are actually promoting niche influencers who are putting out consistent content for one targeted audience that's very niche. So let's say you're helping plumbers in a specific region with the technology for helping generate leads. Like, that's the type of thing that you can become an expert in. So I think this notion of a micro professional influencer is going to be more important than ever. So I think that if you want to succeed at standing out, both as an individual and as a business, you need to bolster your online credibility both for your company brand, but as well for your individual brand. And you need to be combining strategies that are both outbound, very hyper-personalized, multi-channel outreach, meaning, email typically is not enough. You need like multiple touch points on email for one person, as well as maybe phone, LinkedIn, etc. And you need to be doing that in a way that meets all the compliance, because I do think to build trust, you need to be doing things that are kosher. And then at the same time, inbound strategies where you build up your own credibility on digital channels. So when someone Googles your name or your business brand, you're really seen as a thought leader and they want to talk to you because they think you're going to add value from that call.
Unreal. So in a way, Landbase is kind of like a digital go-to-market brain for
That's
outbound,
exactly it.
for outbound, for inbound. Parts of it is marketing, understanding what comes in, understanding where going out at different channels, whether it's text, email, LinkedIn, social, whatever it is. Pretty amazing. If I think back to 30 years ago, Grandpa Bobby would have been going physically door to door and handing out mailers in the mailboxes of each house. I think he'd be pretty freaked out by this, to say the least.
Well, I think today he'd be happy that he can reclaim his day and go on the golf course or take his clients fishing or take them out to dinner. So,
oh, that's for sure. Yeah, he lived for playing on the golf course. Man, he was a really bad golfer, but had a lot of fun playing with him. Be on the fairway and hit a bad shot and take three more until it was, a decent one that he could live with.
yeah, the etiquette that he
Cool.
taught me is that you can take a mulligan, as long as you're playing with your grandfather.
So Dan, there's been this shift from Gen AI to Agentic AI. And with any major technological shift, there's changes to the playbook that need to be made in terms of how you build an amazing business, how you build teams. I'll let you take it over from there. How does this shift affect company building?
Well, if we step back one step, I'd say that there's been a shift from on-prem to cloud AI native. And in that transition of on-prem to cloud, the playbook was rewritten on how you sell software and what that means for building a business in that era. So, for example, the subscription model was introduced, whereas before things were sold upfront and then they were sold on a subscription. Just as the installation model was different, before it was installed on premise, then it was installed, virtually and accessible from anywhere. And that shift created huge opportunities in businesses that could be built native. But when that shift from on-prem cloud emerged, companies like Salesforce, NetSuite, and others pioneered that shift, and the playbook was rewritten. And in my view, it was really Mark Benioff at Salesforce that had pioneered the playbook with his book Behind the Cloud. And I think this shift from cloud to AI is going to require a new playbook. And I'm thinking a lot about what exists beyond the cloud in the AI world. And I think that for this new set of AI native companies, there's going to be a big shift. You mentioned the shift from generative AI to agentic. In my view, to be honest, I think that generative AI didn't really unlock that much different value that could be captured by a startup. So to me, we've seen, use cases where generative AI has been helpful to a business where someone can prompt GPT, or things like GitHub Copilot or other Copilot. But I think Copilot improves things marginally, but not dramatically. I think the dramatic shift is when you can go on autopilot with human in the loop. And that's where I think the promise of agentic AI is. And that's where I think the unlock is going to be for the B2B economy, particularly startups. And I think that in this agentic AI native era, a business can scale far more capitally efficient. And this impacts the way businesses build teams and think about the playbook. So this is everything from the user experience or interface not being about how do I suck someone's time into using 100% of the their day in the tool, It's actually thinking about the opposite. How can I use AI to study what they do and unlock value so they don't have to be in the industry? Then there's the business model shift. Maybe instead of pricing on a subscription, you can price based on income or value. Then there's the way it's delivered. Is it delivered as a one-on-one sales call or in-person field sales, or is it a multi-touch sale where you're educating the customer with tools? So there's all these different new things that will emerge. And honestly, I don't have a good answer of how it's going to play out, but that's cool. That's the fun part. We're building AI native, and I think like these agentic AI native companies that have by nature only been able to be created in the next year, so many of them are still stealth. I think that's what's going to transform the way we build businesses, and it will really make us rethink everything. What does the IT stack look like? How do we build teams? How do we price? How do we engage with our customers? How do we differentiate? All these things are going to be rethought in this agentic AI and native era.
Amazing. You know what? As I hear you speak, I think about Stack Search Partners, my business, talent firm for venture-backed technology companies, and a lot of our approach is it's a very proactive, outbound sourcing approach to attract and speak with the greatest candidates for our partners. And historically, we'd be on email, tracking down emails manually and sending follow-ups manually, or on LinkedIn manually, and sending each follow-up and writing a note on your notepad when to follow up. And, I think automating elements of that in a personalized manner, hyper-personalization at scale, will allow the researchers on my team who are spending a lot of their time doing those types of activities to be, I don't know what the number is yet, but 50%, 200%, 500% more productive if, they're the human that's in the loop and they have agents that are literally automating while they're sleeping, while they're in the bathroom or in the shower, doing this work. And I think you're right. I think we can't quite imagine or fathom how that will change how we build businesses, how business is done. I think the only, thing that I think we can probably both say with certainty is that change will come. There will be change, and we're going to need to embrace it. I think that's a good segue into the impact of AI on startup talent, in this new age. And with AI, and that's kind of a general term, I think these days there's so many different use cases for it, but I'll let you take this how you want. With AI becoming a central part of business, how do you see it influencing the talent landscape for startups?
So I think the talent landscape is changing. I definitely think that while in some ways you could say that companies have been hiring less, and therefore it should make it easier to recruit, the sense I get, and you see this day in, day out, is it's actually that much harder to recruit because people are looking for very niche roles. There's a lot of noise in the market. So I don't think that recruiting's any easier. That's why I think there's a lot of strength in working with a search partner or a firm like Stack to be able to who has a pulse on like the best talent in the market and where things are moving. And I agree with your assessment that in the talent world, whether it's from the perspective of someone owning a recruiting firm or it's from the perspective of an internal team trying to build, it's not getting any easier. It's probably getting harder. And therefore, having a pulse with real relationships, with historic relationships, pre-AI, is super critical. That being said, a lot of the manual repetitive work in the manual research and the outreach and the contacting, that should theoretically be automated. So the role of a recruiter can be much more positioning the benefits and the differentiation of the business or the market opportunity, or vice versa, better understanding the talent pool to be able to pitch that talent pool to the trusted clients. So I think that there's a lot of discourse and dialogue today about like, could there be a unicorn that is just a single person unicorn or a small team? And I think that is possible. Although I think, historically you could have created a company that had really great revenue, leaner. Um, I think that, when I'm looking at it, you can always justify growth. And I think there's differentiated talent that can grow a business in different ways. So my belief is that AI can assist humans, and can help automate a lot of manual repetitive tasks. It can also bring data to the forefront of their decision making. But I still think in the foreseeable future, um, I really believe in human decision making, human ingenuity, and kind of building talent, and really kind of thinking about differentiating through culture, and brand. And for that reason, I think, um, you know, talent is more important than ever. And for me, I'm in the era of AI. I'm that much more focused on getting really great human talent that works really well together and building an amazing culture. I'm not just saying like, oh, I'm going to use AI agents for everything, and I don't need to.
I I think I think it's so spot on. When I think about you know attracting talent, or if we're working with a partner who's looking for a few great software engineers or a product manager or a leader, you know, you now I concur with you. The market is tough in terms of going after candidates and getting them excited. There's so much noise in this market, partially due to AI and the amount of communication that is out there. So how do you differentiate, right? And I think you nailed it on the head. Relationships is how you differentiate, human relationships. And I think that so that's something that we're doubling down on, tripling down on. How do we spend more time, genuine time, building relationships with the best talent out there? Internally for startups, whether it's a product manager, whether it's a software engineer, whether it's, a CRO. I mean, if you can have these folks who maybe their superpower is critical thinking, or maybe their superpower is, building relationships to make more sales. If you can free up their time from the mundane, more administrative tasks, I think that's where this gets really exciting.
One last question for you. Yeah. So what do you feel were the kind of skills or ideas that Grandpa Bobby imparted, and how did that impact your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I think about Grandpa, he was this larger than life personality. He had a way with people. He was warm. He was authentic. He was genuine. He'd look people in the eye when they were speaking. A lot of kind of old school, but I think very relevant traits today that are important in business and life, really. I think another one that stands out to me is, this was a guy that grew up with very little. He grew up poor to some degree, had 4 kids, your dad, my dad, our aunt, our other uncle. Lost his wife when he was, 45, 50 years old, and had to build these businesses and raise 4 children on his own. And, I don't know exactly how that affected, I know in some ways, but, how has it affected our parents? How has it affected us? And I think that it puts things into perspective sometimes, that being resilient, entrepreneurship it's a way of life in a way. It's more than sitting down at 9 o'clock and leaving your desk at 5 o'clock. It's a full-fledged way of life. And I think, it's funny because I remember, Dan, when I must have been, I don't know, 8 years old. You're a couple of years older than me. You must have been, I don't know, 11 or 12. And we were going on a family trip. We were sitting on an airplane. I don't think you remember this at all, but you're my bigger cousin. And I remember saying to you, hey, Dan, what do you want to do when you grow up? What do you want to be? And you looked at me, and I swear I remember this, and you said, I want to build a big business. And I said, oh, What does that mean? He said, well, I want to build a big business that helps tons and tons of people. I thought that was pretty cool. The typical answer is at that age where I want to be a firefighter, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a hockey player, especially in our family. That was the answer you gave. You've clearly lived it as a small town kid from small town Ontario, Canada. You built a incredible business, $1 billion plus business in AppDirect. You're going down that path right now, building Landbase, and I think Grandpa Bobby would be he'd be proud of you. So,
well, likewise,
yeah,
Elon, and really appreciate it. And yeah, it's great to see the business you've built and how you've been a great partner to us, both at AppDirect and at Landbase, and recruiting our team. And I think ultimately, it's come up many times, but trusted relationships, human relationships, and people are really the differentiator. And like life is all about, I think in the end, it's not about the machines or the work that you do. It's about the people you do it with. And I'm super excited to have you as a cousin and a friend, and also business colleague. And likewise for all the people listening, really encourage you to think through the people that you love in your life and try to think of ways to spend more time with them and interact with them, because I think that's really what's gonna when you look back, I'm sure it's about the people. And cool to reflect on so many stories of our childhood and growing up in a fun entrepreneurial family.
couldn't agree more, Dan. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Likewise.